Welcome back to this week's Beyond the Panel. Despite my spooky attire, by the time this posts, unfortunately, Halloween will have passed. So I thought we would get back to some non-spooky books for a change, perhaps. Some of these are kind of spooky. My theme for this week is some historical fiction, so all these take place in different periods of history. So I'm going to arrange them chronologically from the oldest to the newest. My first one is Solomon Kane, which is about a Puritan what kills people. So, you know, if you like some cozy Amish romances, perhaps you would like some Puritan swashbuckling sword and sorcery. It's a gateway. So this is by the writings of Robert E. Howard, who is famously known for creating Conan the Barbarian. This is one of his lesser-known characters that he created. So it was actually backup stories in Savage Sword of Conan, which was a Marvel magazine in the 70s, so that's why it is in black and white, because all the Marvel magazines of that time period were in black and white. But it translates really well to the sword and sorcery stuff. So these have awesome art, awesome stories, and if you're curious to dive into more of Robert E. Howard's writings, this is a neat series to get into. And that takes place in the late 1500s, early 1600s. My next one hops ahead to 1782. This is a manga series called Blade of the Immortal, and it follows this immortal samurai that was infected by like these holy bloodworms by a nun. So he's sort of similar to Wolverine, where he has like this crazy healing factor. Like you could chop off his arm and he would get better. In one of the stories, a samurai like impales his head all the way through, and he just heals from that. But he is this immortal samurai that is charged with getting penance on his past misdeeds by killing the wicked. And it follows him being the bodyguard to this woman here, who is the heir to this sword school. And the antagonists of this story are a group of swordsmen that are going around and systematically massacring all these other sword schools and stealing their secrets to fold them into themselves, so they will have like the one master sword school. So this is an awesome bloody slash 'em up manga that's pretty neat. The main character is called Manji, and is also the character that he uses on his robes, which is the swastika. And there is a little article at the first of this that explains why he would use the swastika and the Japanese Buddhist meanings for that symbol before it was co-opted by the Nazis in 1910. So there are no like fascist Nazi leanings to the use of this symbol at all. It's just from a spiritual standpoint. So this is an omnibus, which means it has several volumes inside of it. Currently we have 3 volumes of this in the system, with more to come. My next one hops ahead to post-Civil War in the 1870s, Jonah Hex. If all you know about Jonah Hex is that really awful movie from several years ago, please just pretend that didn't happen. He does not have a horse that has Gatling guns on it for some reason. This is a really cool, gritty, grim Western, especially this series that we have several volumes of in the system by Jimmy Palmiotti and Justin Gray. They are like fun, violent spaghetti westerns. Another great thing about Jonah Hex is regardless of what arbitrary volume you pick up, they're all self-contained little vignettes that are pretty awesome. Speaking of questionable attire, he always wears a Confederate soldier uniform, but he doesn't have any sort of racist leanings. It's just that he defected from the army to join the Confederacy because that just happened to be where he lived. And as the war went on and the Emancipation Proclamation happened, he decided to give himself up to the Union. But where he surrendered, there was a cruel Union captain that ran that camp and was able to track back Jonah Hex to where his friends and adopted family were, and slaughtered everyone and scarred him horribly. So he wears the Confederate uniform as a symbol for his past mistakes and a remembrance for his dead friends. But this is always a fun, really well-written read. This is actually in color, which is nice. But yeah, if you want some shoot 'em up, spaghetti western, John Wayne type stuff, this is a great series. My next one hops ahead to the early 1900s, around the time of World War I, but before that as well, and follows the Mata Hari, which is sometimes billed as the original femme fatale. She was a courtesan, exotic dancer, circus performer, who spied for the Germans, she spied for the French, and was eventually killed by firing squad. And even though this is historical fiction, it is very deeply based in fact and really well researched by the author, who combed through historical files, government files, and tried to paint a picture of her in the truest form, and tried to find out the reasonings why she did, how she had to do what she did, and kind of got forced into stuff. So this is a really interesting read if you're interested in the history of espionage, about World War I, about the kings and queens of the time. Awesome read. My next one hops ahead to the 20s. This is a hard-boiled, sexy detective story that follows Minky Woodcock, who is the daughter of a famed detective that is striking out on her own as a female lady detective, which was, of course, unheard of and scandalous at the time. And speaking of my first book, which was on the writings of Robert E. Howard, this also follows Robert E. Howard, which was really big into the spiritual movement that just ran rampant at the time, and was very in vogue, all those seances, things like that, clairvoyance. So it follows Robert E. Howard and Harry Houdini, which was the famous escape artist and also just a rabid debunker of anything spiritual. He very much would have liked there to be spiritual stuff, but due to his own experiences with trying to contact his mother, he made it his life's goal to debunk charlatans. So it is all about a mystery that Minky was hired to solve for Houdini's wife. That was pretty interesting, but this is an awesome adult mystery with some gorgeous art to it. And speaking of mysteries, my next one hops ahead to the 1930s and follows the original Golden Age Sandman. So in the 40s, there was a hero called the Sandman that was the inspiration for the resurgence of the Sandman in the 80s that Neil Gaiman did and won several awards. And he was just a detective that would have these premonitions and dreams about criminals. And so he went out in a trench coat, fedora, and gas mask, and gas guns, and would put criminals to sleep and tie them up and leave a poem for the police. And this is a series called Sandman Mysteries Theater that Matt Wagner did. Matt Wagner is awesome, especially when it comes to kind of creepy detective stories. He's written more Batman stories than I could probably name, but all his stuff is always really well written and we do have a few volumes of Sandman Mysteries Theater in the system. And my last one takes place in 1953, and it's called Red Menace, and it follows the Red Scare in the post-World War II landscape of America and the Senate hearings by Senator Joe McCarthy, who was constantly trying to flush out communists and led to all kinds of shenanigans of the time. And it follows a Captain America-esque, very patriotic hero called the Eagle, and his testifying before Congress and all the shenanigans that take place about mass vigilantes and how can America trust them because they don't know who they are, and do they have ulterior motives, which is sort of a plot that gets explored a lot. This is one of my favorites, and it has one of my favorite artists, Jerry Ordway, that did a bunch of Silver Age stuff for DC. But if you're interested in more of like the Red Scare, congressional testimony, there's also the Justice Society versus, well, America versus the Justice Society. There's also Cowl, which takes place in the 50s and involves the unionization of superheroes, which is also another interesting concept. So I hope you've liked my trip through time and maybe have found some interesting historical fiction titles. Thanks so much for joining me. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you guys next week.